Rain hammers Koreatown like it's trying to drown the truth. Nia Bell is cornered in an alley by three men who think money makes them untouchable. She whispers the only thing she's ever believed about herself. Nobody is coming. Then a shadow steps out of the dark in a black coat, and within seconds, the most feared crime boss on the East Coast destroys the men who hurt her without raising his voice. When she breaks and says, "I'm a nobody," he looks at her like the whole city just disappeared. Not to me. If you want to see how far this story goes, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and stay until the end, because nobody walks away from this untouched. Okay, sit. The rain in Koreatown didn't fall so much as it attacked. It came down sideways, slapping against the neon signs in red and gold, turning the sidewalk into a black mirror that reflected nothing back at Nia Bell except her own exhaustion. She'd been on her feet for 11 hours. 11 hours of refilling coffee cups for men who looked through her like she was made of glass. 11 hours of carrying plates with a wrist that still ached from the surgery 2 years back. 11 hours of smiling so hard her jaw had locked somewhere around hour 6. The diner smelled like burnt grease and bleach, and when her shift finally ended, Mr. Choi hadn't even looked up from the register. He just slid her tips across the counter, $11.40, and said, "Tomorrow, 6 a.m., don't be late again." She wasn't late again. She was never late. That was the joke of her whole life. She did everything right, and the world still treated her like an inconvenience it hadn't gotten around to disposing of yet. Nia pulled her thin jacket tighter and stepped out into the rain. She had $11.40 and a bus pass that was 3 days from expiring with no money to renew it. Her apartment, if you could call a single room above a laundromat an apartment, was 11 blocks away. She used to count things. Counting made the world feel smaller, more survivable. $11, 11 blocks, 11 hours. Some twisted numerology of poverty. She cut through the alley behind Yoon's grocery because it shaved 4 minutes off her walk. And 4 minutes mattered when your shoes had a hole in the left sole and the rain was finding every inch of skin it could reach. That was her first mistake. The second mistake was not noticing the black SUV idling at the alley's far end until she was already past the dumpsters, already too deep into the dark for the choice to be hers anymore. 3 men stepped out of the shadows like they'd been waiting for exactly this. A woman alone, soaked, small. They were dressed too well for this neighborhood. Tailored coats, polished shoes that the rain hadn't dared touch yet, gold watches that caught what little light there was. Rich men playing at something dangerous because danger, to men like that, was a costume they could take off whenever they got bored. Hey! The one in front had a face like he'd never been told no in his life. "You're out late!" Nia's heart slammed once, hard, against her ribs. She knew this script. Every woman who'd ever walked alone at night knew this script. The way her body went cold and alert at the same time, the way her mind started doing math. Distance to the street, distance to her phone, distance to anyone who might hear her if she screamed. "I'm just heading home," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, because steady was a skill she'd had to learn early, the way some people learn piano. "Home." The man smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Where's home for a girl who smells like a diner?" The second man laughed, low and ugly. The third just watched her, the way a man watches something he's already decided to take. "I don't have anything," Nia said. "I don't have money. I don't have—" "We're not here for your money." The first man stepped closer, close enough that she could smell cologne and whiskey underneath it, close enough that the rain on his face looked almost gentle compared to what was in his eyes. "We're here because you looked lonely, and we like lonely." Her back hit the brick wall before she even realized she'd been moving. The dumpster to her left, brick to her right, 3 men closing the only open space in front of her. Rain ran down the back of her neck like fingers. This was the moment. She would think about it for the rest of her life, when something in her simply gave up. Not her body. Her body was still fighting, still calculating angles, still looking for the gap that wasn't there. But some older, more tired part of her, the part that had been disappointed by every person who'd ever promised to show up, that part just folded its hands and said quietly, the way you'd announce the weather, "Nobody is coming." She didn't even mean to say it out loud. It slipped out between her teeth, barely a whisper, swallowed almost entirely by the rain. It was the truest sentence she owned. Nobody had come when her mother left. Nobody had come when the hospital bills ate through every dollar she'd ever saved. Nobody had come when the surgeon told her, in that flat clinical voice doctors use when they've delivered the same news 100 times, that the damage was permanent, that motherhood, if she'd ever wanted it, was a door now closed and locked and painted over. Nobody had ever come for Nia Bell. Why would tonight be different? The first man reached for her wrist, and then the alley changed. It wasn't loud. That was the strange part she would remember. There was no shout, no screech of tires, no dramatic entrance lit by lightning. There was just a shift in the air, a sense of someone else's weight added to the scene, and the man's hand never closed around her wrist because his arm was suddenly bent backward at an angle arms aren't built for, and he was screaming into the wet concrete with a man's knee between his shoulder blades before Nia had even processed that a fourth person existed in this alley at all. The second man turned, throwing a punch that should have connected with a jaw and instead connected with nothing, because the figure who had been standing perfectly still a half-second ago was no longer there. He was beside the man instead, one hand catching the wrist mid-swing, twisting, and the sound that came out of the second man's throat was not a word, just an animal note of shock and pain as he dropped to his knees in the rain. The third man ran. He didn't even try to be brave about it. He just turned and bolted toward the mouth of the alley, and the man in the black coat let him go, watching him disappear into the wet dark with an expression of mild, almost bored contempt, like he'd been hoping for more of a fight and was disappointed not to get one. Nia hadn't moved. She couldn't. Her back was still against the brick, her hand still pressed flat to the cold, wet wall like she was trying to disappear into it. And she watched, through rain-blurred eyes, through a kind of static disbelief, as the man in the black coat crouched down in front of the first attacker, the one still groaning on the ground, and said something low in a voice with no heat in it at all, a voice that was somehow more frightening for being so calm. "You don't touch women in this neighborhood." A pause. "You don't touch anyone in this neighborhood without my permission. Do you understand?" The man on the ground made a sound that might have been a yes. "Good." The stranger stood, brushed non-existent dust off his sleeve, and looked down at the two men crumpled in the rain like they were trash he intended to deal with later. "Get out of my city!" They scrambled. They actually scrambled, slipping on wet concrete, dragging each other up by the collars, disappearing the way cockroaches disappear when a light switches on. Fast, ashamed, gone. And then there was silence. Just the rain, hammering down on dumpster lids and broken pavement, and Nia Bell standing frozen against a brick wall, staring at a man she had never seen before in her life. He was tall, not impossibly so, but tall enough that the alley felt smaller around him. Dark hair slicked flat by the rain. A black coat, expensive, the kind of expensive that didn't announce itself loudly, but you could feel it anyway, in the way it moved, in the way it didn't cling to him, the way cheap fabric clings to skin in a downpour. His face was sharp-boned, controlled, the kind of face that had learned a long time ago not to give anything away for free. But his eyes, when he finally turned them on her, his eyes were doing something his face wasn't. "Are you hurt?" His voice, when it was aimed at her instead of at the men on the ground, had lost its edge. It was quieter. Careful, almost. Nia's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her hands were shaking. She could see them shaking, pressed against the wet brick, and she couldn't make them stop. "Hey!" He took a step closer, slow, the way you'd approach something wounded. "Look at me. Are you hurt?" "No," she finally managed. Her voice cracked in half on the single syllable. "No, I'm fine." He studied her for a moment too long, like he didn't believe the word fine applied to anyone standing the way she was standing, soaked and trembling and pressed into a wall like the wall was the only thing holding her upright, which, she realized distantly, it was. "You're not fine," he said. Not unkindly, just factually, the way he'd say the rain was cold or the alley was dark. "You don't have to perform for me. Nobody's grading you on it." That word, nobody, landed wrong in her chest, because it was the same word she'd just whispered into the storm, like a prayer to a God she didn't believe answered anymore. Her knees finally gave out the truth her mouth had been too proud to say. "Nobody was coming," she said, and her voice broke entirely on the last word, and to her own horror she felt tears mixing with the rain on her face, indistinguishable, useless, the kind of crying that comes not from this moment, but from every moment that led to it. That's what I said, right before. Nobody is coming. I've never had anybody come. Not once. Not my whole life. And I stood here and I thought, this is it. This is just what happens to people like me. Because nobody ever comes for people like me. She didn't know why she was saying all of this to a stranger in an alley. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the particular vertigo of having been seconds away from something unspeakable and then suddenly, impossibly, not. Maybe some doors, once they crack open even slightly, don't know how to close back up neatly. The man in the black coat didn't interrupt her. He let her finish, the rain falling around both of them, his expression unreadable in the dark except for those eyes, which had gone very still, very focused, like he was looking at something he hadn't expected to find in an alley behind a grocery store on a Tuesday night. "I'm a nobody," she said finally, smaller now, the fight gone out of her voice entirely, just an exhausted confession dragged up from somewhere old and tired. "That's all I am, a nobody." He took one more step toward her, slow, deliberate, until he was close enough that she had to tilt her chin to hold his gaze, close enough that she could see the rain running in lines down a face that had clearly seen worse nights than this one, and had learned a long time ago to keep most of what it felt locked behind something steel. But not all of it. Not in that second. "Not to me," he said. 2 words, that was all. But something about the way he said them, flat, certain, with no room left for argument, hit her harder than anything any man had ever said to her, harder than every empty promise, every "I'll call you," every "I won't leave," that had turned out to be exactly as worthless as she'd always suspected words were. "Who are you?" she whispered. He studied her another moment, like he was deciding how much of an answer she could carry. Then, "Someone who happened to be passing by." A pause, the corner of his mouth doing something that wasn't quite a smile. "Lucky for you." "Lucky," she repeated and laughed. A broken, disbelieving sound, half a sob. "Yeah, lucky." He reached into his coat and produced, of all things, a clean handkerchief, dark gray, monogrammed in thread she couldn't read in the dark. He held it out to her without ceremony. "You're bleeding," he said, nodding toward her hand, and she looked down and realized she'd scraped her palm against the brick at some point without noticing, a thin line of red mixing with rainwater. "It's fine," she said automatically. That word again, fine, her armor, her lie. But he didn't withdraw the handkerchief, just held it there until she finally took it, pressing it against the cut with fingers that still wouldn't stop shaking. "Where do you live?" he asked. The question landed strangely, practical, like he intended to do something about the answer. I didn't ask what you needed." His voice was patient but unmoving, a wall dressed up as a question. "I asked where you live, because those men know your face now, and men like that don't forget a face they've decided they want. So either you tell me where you're going, or I follow you there anyway, and you spend the whole walk wondering if the footsteps behind you are mine or theirs." It should have terrified her. The bluntness of it, the casual certainty with which he assumed control of a situation she hadn't invited him into. But there was something underneath the bluntness that didn't feel like a threat. It felt strangely like the first honest sentence anyone had said to her in longer than she could remember. 11 blocks, she said quietly. Above a laundromat on Hewitt. He nodded once, like that settled something, and turned toward the mouth of the alley where, she now saw, a black SUV sat at the curb, engine running, rain sliding off its windshield in sheets. A man in a dark suit stood by the rear door, having apparently materialized there during the entire confrontation without Nia noticing a single thing except the man in front of her. "I'm not getting in a car with a stranger," Nia said, finding some last reserve of self-preservation even as her body screamed with exhaustion and cold. "Good," he said, and something in his face shifted, approval, maybe, or recognition. "You shouldn't. I'll walk you." "You don't have to." "I know." He was already moving, falling into step beside her, matching his pace to hers without being asked, the SUV crawling along the curb a few feet behind them like a patient animal. "I'm doing it anyway. They walked in silence for the first 2 blocks. The rain hadn't let up, and Naya's shoes squelched with every step, her thin jacket doing nothing at all against the cold. But she found, oddly, that she wasn't thinking about the cold. She was thinking about the men in the alley, about the casual, surgical violence with which this stranger had dismantled them, about the way none of it had seemed to cost him anything. No adrenaline, no shaking hands, none of the things her own body was still doing in the aftermath. "You didn't even break a sweat," she said finally, because the silence had gotten too loud in her own head. "I've done worse before breakfast," he said, and there was no boast in it. Just fact, delivered the way you'd mentioned the time. "That's not comforting." "I wasn't trying to comfort you." He glanced sideways at her, and in the orange wash of a streetlight she caught the ghost of something almost amused crossing his face. "I was answering your question." "Fair," she admitted, and surprised herself by almost smiling. Another block passed. The laundromat sign came into view ahead, half its neon letters burned out, so it read, "U-Drom Tea" instead of laundromat, a sad little joke of a sign that Nia had stopped finding funny a long time ago. "This is it," she said, stopping at the door beside it, the one that led up a narrow staircase to the room she rented for more money than it was worth from a landlord who never fixed the heat. The man stopped too, looking up at the building with an expression she couldn't read. Assessment, maybe. The kind of look a person gives a problem they're already starting to solve in their head. "Thank you," Nia said, and meant it more than the word could carry. "For whatever that was back there. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't—" "Don't," he said, cutting her off gently. "Don't finish that sentence. It happened. You're here. That's the only part that matters." She nodded, hugging her arms around herself against the cold, suddenly aware of how strange this whole night had become, how a walk home that should have ended in tragedy had instead ended with her standing on a sidewalk talking to a man whose name she still didn't know. "I don't even know your name," she said. He considered her for a long moment, long enough that she wondered if he was going to answer at all, or simply turn and vanish back into the rain the way he'd appeared out of it. "Quan Seo Jin," he said finally. The name didn't mean anything to her in that moment. It would mean everything within 48 hours. Would mean fear in some mouths and reverence in others. Would mean a name people in this part of the city said in lowered voices, glancing over their shoulders first. But right now, standing soaked and shivering in front of a broken neon sign, it was just a name. A man's name. Nothing more. "Nia," she said. "Nia Bell." He repeated it once, quietly, like he was filing it away somewhere permanent. "Nia Bell." Then, with the faintest incline of his head, "Get inside, get warm, lock your door." "Will I—" She stopped herself, embarrassed by the question forming, but he waited, patient, until she finished it anyway. "Will I see you again?" Something passed behind his eyes, calculation, maybe, or a decision being made in real time that he hadn't planned on making an hour ago. "Yes," he said simply. No explanation, no promise dressed up in flowery language. Just yes, flat and certain, the same way he'd said not to me back in the alley. Then he turned and walked back toward the waiting car, his coat dark and heavy with rain, and Nia stood on the sidewalk and watched the SUV pull away into the storm until its taillights disappeared around the corner. And only then did she finally go inside, climbing the narrow stairs to her cold little room, peeling off wet clothes with hands that had finally stopped shaking. She told herself it was nothing. A stranger had helped her. Strangers did that sometimes, didn't they? Even in a city this hard. She told herself she would never see Kwon Seo-jin again, that his promise was the kind men made in dramatic moments and forgot about by morning. She was wrong about that, the way she'd been wrong about so many things in her life. But this time, being wrong was about to change everything. The next morning, Mr. Choi was already barking orders when she walked into the diner 10 minutes early, soaked again because the rain hadn't let up overnight. Her shoes still not fully dry from the night before. She tied her apron with fingers that ached from the cold and started her shift the way she started every shift. Invisible, efficient, careful not to take up more space in the world than absolutely necessary. It was around 10 in the morning when she noticed the man sitting in the booth by the window. He wasn't drinking his coffee. He wasn't eating the toast in front of him. He was watching the street outside through the rain-streaked glass, and every few minutes his eyes would flick, briefly, toward Naya, before returning to the window. She didn't think much of it at first. Men watched her sometimes, usually for reasons that made her skin crawl. But this man's gaze wasn't like that. There was nothing hungry in it, nothing predatory. It was more like he was keeping count, like he was making sure she was still there. It was nearly noon when she finally placed why his face seemed familiar. He'd been standing near the black SUV the night before. The man in the dark suit who'd materialized at the rear door without her noticing him appear. Her stomach dropped. She found an excuse to walk past his booth, refilling water glasses that didn't need refilling, and when she reached his table, she set down the pitcher with more force than necessary. "Are you following me?" she asked, low enough that the other customers wouldn't hear, but not so low that he could pretend he hadn't heard her clearly. The man looked up at her, calm, unbothered, the way men who got paid to be unbothered always looked. "Mr. Kwan asked me to make sure you got to work safely," he said, "and that you'll get home safely tonight as well." "I didn't ask for a babysitter." "No," the man agreed. "You didn't." He picked up his coffee cup, took a slow sip, set it back down with exact precision. "But 3 men got photographed last night, leaving an alley in a hurry, and this morning those same 3 men got photographed again, this time meeting with people who don't like Mr. Kwan very much. People who might be curious about the woman those 3 men were initially interested in." Nia's blood went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the rain outside. "What does that mean?" "It means," the man said, folding his napkin with the same unsettling precision he'd used on his coffee cup, "that you went from being nobody to being somebody's business in the span of one night. And in this part of the city, Miss Bell, that's not always a safe thing to be." She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. 12 hours ago, she'd been a broke waitress nobody could be bothered to remember. And now strangers in suits were tracking her location and warning her about people who didn't like her rescuer. It felt like a fever dream. It felt like someone else's life accidentally bleeding into hers. "Tell Mr. Kwan," she said, straightening to her full height, summoning whatever scraps of dignity she had left after a night of crying in an alley and a morning of being watched through diner glass, "that I didn't ask to be his business. I didn't ask for any of this." The man's expression didn't change. "I'll tell him," he said. "But for what it's worth, once Mr. Kwan decides someone is his business, Miss Bell, that decision tends not to be very negotiable." He left a $50 bill on the table for a $4 breakfast, stood, buttoned his coat, and walked out into the rain without looking back, leaving Nia standing frozen by the booth, the water pitcher still dripping in her hand, the bell above the diner door chiming softly behind him like a period at the end of a sentence she hadn't agreed to be written into. She finished her shift in a fog. Every customer who walked through the door made her flinch slightly. Every car that idled too long outside the window sent her pulse spiking. By the time she clocked out at 6, exhaustion had layered itself over fear until she could barely tell where one ended and the other began. The rain had finally thinned to a drizzle when she stepped outside, and she'd barely made it half a block before she saw the SUV parked at the curb again. Same black paint, same tinted windows, same quiet menace sitting there like it belonged to the street. The rear window rolled down. "Get in," Kwan Seojin said, and his voice had none of the rain-softened gentleness from the night before. It was harder now, edged with something that sounded almost like worry wearing the costume of command. "I told your man I'm not your business," Nia said, stopping on the sidewalk, rain misting around her like the city itself was holding its breath. "You're not my business," Seojin agreed, watching her with that same unreadable intensity from the alley. "You're my problem, and I take care of my problems personally." "That's not better." "No," he admitted. "It's not. Get in the car, Nia, please." The please surprised her more than anything else he'd said. Men like him. And she was beginning to understand in pieces exactly what kind of man he was. Didn't usually have to ask twice for anything, let alone soften the second ask into something close to a request. She got in the car. The interior smelled like leather and rain and something faintly metallic underneath, like the ghost of gun oil that had been cleaned away but never quite eliminated. Seojin sat across from her, his suit dry despite the weather outside, his face carved into the same controlled stillness she remembered from the alley, except now, up close, in better light, she could see the things that stillness was working to hide. The faint shadow under his eyes that spoke of too little sleep, the tension in his jaw that never fully released. "What happened last night," he said without preamble, "put a target on your back that I didn't intend to put there. 3 men attacked you because they were drunk and stupid and thought you were easy. But they ran straight from that alley into the arms of the Hahn family, and the Hahn family does not forgive easily when their associates end up bleeding on the ground because of someone connected to me." "I'm not connected to you," Nia said, though even as she said it, she heard how thin the protest sounded. "You are now," Seojin said simply, "whether either of us wanted that or not. I'm sorry, that's the truth, and I don't see the use in dressing it up as something prettier than it is." She looked at him. Really looked. The way she hadn't let herself in the alley, too shocked and shaking to study his face properly, and saw, underneath the danger that clung to him like cologne, something else. Tiredness. The particular exhaustion of a man who'd spent a long time being the only thing standing between people he cared about and a world that wanted to take them apart. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "I want you safe," he said. "That's all. That's the whole list. And how do you propose to do that?" He held her gaze for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice had dropped into something quieter, almost careful, like a man setting down something fragile. "You're going to come stay at my house," he said, "until this settles. I have the room, I have the security, and I have absolutely no intention of letting a woman I dragged into danger get hurt because I was too proud to fix what I broke." Nia stared at him, rain still drying on her skin, $11.40 still sitting useless in her jacket pocket, and felt the entire architecture of her careful, small, survivable life beginning, irreversibly, to shift beneath her feet. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "No," Seojin agreed, his eyes steady on hers in the dim light of the car. "But you're about to." The SUV pulled away from the curb, carrying her deeper into a city she thought she knew, toward a house she couldn't yet imagine, toward 2 children who didn't know her name yet but would, soon, need her more than anyone had ever needed her in her life, and toward a man whose hands had destroyed 3 strangers without hesitation and now sat folded, careful, almost gentle, in his own lap, like he was afraid of what they might do if he let them move too fast around someone this fragile. Outside, the rain kept falling on Koreatown, washing the blood from the alley into the gutters, erasing the evidence of what had happened there, but not erasing what it had started. Nothing could erase that now. The estate sat behind iron gates on a stretch of land outside the city that didn't belong on any map tourists used, surrounded by trees that had been planted decades ago, specifically to block sight lines from the road. Nia hadn't said a word for the last 20 minutes of the drive. She just watched the gate swing open, watched gravel crunch under tires, watched the house rise out of the dark like something built to be defended rather than lived in. Seojin walked her through the front doors himself. No staff to greet her, no grand introduction, just a long hallway lined with dim sconces and the sound of her own wet shoes squeaking against marble that had clearly never had a chance to dry someone like her before. "Juno doesn't like strangers," Seojin said, low, as they climbed a staircase wide enough for 6 people to walk abreast. "Don't take it personally if he doesn't speak to you. He stopped speaking to most people 2 years ago." 2 years ago, Nia repeated. "What happened 2 years ago?" Seojin's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough that she caught it in her peripheral vision. "Their mother," he said, and didn't elaborate, and something in his tone told her not to push. They found Juno in a room at the end of the hall, sitting cross-legged on the floor, with a tablet propped against his knees, headphones clamped over his ears so tight they'd left red marks on the sides of his skull. He was maybe 12, all sharp elbows and suspicious eyes, and when he looked up and saw Nia standing in his doorway behind his father, his face did something complicated. Surprise, then immediate, total shutdown, like a door slamming closed behind glass eyes. "Who's that?" Juno said. Not a question, an accusation dressed as one. "This is Nia," Seojin said. "She's staying with us for a while." "Why?" "Because it's not safe for her anywhere else right now." Juno's eyes cut to Nia, head to foot, taking in her cheap wet jacket, her diner shoes, the $11.40 she still hadn't bothered taking out of her pocket because some part of her hadn't accepted yet that she wasn't going back to that life by morning. "She looks poor," Juno said flatly. "Juno, I'm just saying what's true." The boy's voice cracked slightly on the last word, the cracking voice of a kid who hadn't finished becoming a teenager yet, but was already practicing at being cruel because cruelty, in this house, had apparently proven useful as armor. "You always say tell the truth, Dad." "I'm telling the truth." Nia felt the sting of it land somewhere deep and old, somewhere that had been waiting her whole life for exactly this kind of confirmation. Yes, you are exactly what you're afraid you are. But she didn't let it show on her face. She'd had a lot of practice not letting things show on her face. "You're right," she said evenly before Seojin could respond. "I am poor. I'm also tired and I'm soaked through and I've had a really bad 2 days. So if it's all the same to you, I'd rather not fight about it tonight." Juno blinked. Clearly he hadn't expected agreement. He stared at her a second longer, something shifting behind his eyes that wasn't quite respect yet, but was at least curiosity, and then he put his headphones back on without another word, which Seojin seemed to take as a victory, however small. They found Mira in the next room over, already in pajamas printed with cartoon foxes, sitting at a little desk drawing something in crayon with the kind of total absorption only small children are capable of. She looked up when they entered, and her whole face opened like a window. "Daddy!" She scrambled off her chair and ran straight into Seojin's legs, and Nia watched something happen to his face in that moment that she hadn't seen in the alley, hadn't seen in the car, hadn't seen at all until right now. His shoulders dropped an inch, his jaw unclenched, and for one unguarded second he looked less like a man who destroyed people without raising his voice and more like exactly what he was underneath all of it. A father, tired, trying. "Hey, Peanut," he said, scooping her up like she weighed nothing. "This is Nia. She's going to stay with us." Mira studied Nia with huge dark eyes, thumb finding its way partway to her mouth before some self-conscious 6-year-old instinct stopped it. "Are you Daddy's friend?" "I am," Nia said, and her voice came out softer than she expected, surprising herself. "Do you like foxes?" "I love foxes." Mira beamed like Nia had just passed the only test that actually mattered in this house, and held up her drawing. A lopsided orange shape with triangle ears and what might have been 7 legs, with the proud seriousness of a curator unveiling a masterpiece. "That's beautiful," Nia said, and meant it, in the specific way you mean something when a child's unguarded joy catches you off guard in the middle of the worst week of your life. Seojin set Mira down gently. "Go brush your teeth. I'll come tuck you in." "Promise?" "Promise." Mira scampered off, and the warmth that had briefly thawed Seojin's face cooled back into its usual careful neutrality the second she was out of the room. He turned to Nia. "There's a guest room down the hall, clean clothes, dry towels. My housekeeper left some things out for you before she went home for the night." A pause. "I know this is a lot." "A lot," Nia repeated, and laughed, short and disbelieving. "Yesterday I was worried about renewing a bus pass. Now I'm in a house with armed guards, and a kid who hates me on sight, and a little girl who drew me a 7-legged fox." 6, Seojin corrected, the faintest crack of something almost like humor at the corner of his mouth. "I counted." "You counted the legs on a crayon fox." "I count everything," he said, and something about the flatness of the statement made it land less like a joke and more like a confession. She woke the next morning disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was, until the unfamiliar weight of expensive sheets and the absence of street noise reminded her. She found her way downstairs eventually, drawn by the smell of coffee, and found Seojin in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, staring at his phone with the particular stillness of a man reading something he didn't like. "Bad news?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, set the phone face down on the counter with deliberate care, like he was trying not to throw it. "The Han family released photographs last night. You, getting into my car outside the diner." Her stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means Yura Han knows your face now, and Yura Han doesn't forget faces she's decided to be jealous of." "Jealous?" Nia stared at him. "Why would she be jealous of me?" Seojin's jaw worked silently for a second before he answered. "Yura's family has been trying to arrange an alliance between us for 2 years. Marriage, business consolidation. The usual ugly math people like us do instead of falling in love like normal people." He said it without inflection, like reciting a fact about weather patterns. I've refused every time, but refusing quietly is different from refusing publicly. And a stranger climbing into my car in front of witnesses. That's about as public as it gets. So I made things worse. You didn't make anything. I made things worse by stepping into that alley. His eyes met hers, steady, unapologetic. I'd do it again. Before she could respond, Juno walked into the kitchen, backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones already around his neck, and stopped dead when he saw Nia sitting at the counter in borrowed clothes, drinking coffee like she belonged there. She's still here, he said to his father, not to her. She's staying here, Juno. We talked about this. You talked. I didn't agree to anything. The boy's voice had an edge that hadn't been there the night before, sharper now, fed by sleep and resentment in equal measure. Mom's been gone 2 years and you bring home some random waitress and act like that's normal. Juno. No, it's fine, Nia said quietly, setting down her cup. He's allowed to be angry. I'm not angry, Juno snapped, in the universal tone of every angry person who has ever insisted they weren't angry. I just don't get why we have a stranger living in our house because Dad felt guilty about something. It wasn't guilt, Seojin said, and his voice had dropped into something low and warning, a tone Nia hadn't heard from him before, not the careful calm from the alley, something raw underneath it. It was the right thing to do. You used to understand the difference. I used to have a mom, Juno said, and the kitchen went absolutely silent, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses against the walls. Before that, I understood a lot of things. He grabbed an apple off the counter and walked out without waiting for a response, the front door slamming somewhere down the hall a few seconds later, hard enough to rattle a picture frame. Seojin stood very still for a long moment, hands flat against the kitchen counter, breathing slow and controlled the way Nia imagined a man breathed when he was actively choosing not to break something with his fists. I'm sorry, he said finally, not looking at her. You don't have to apologize for your son grieving. He's not just grieving. Seojin's voice was quiet, almost too quiet. He's scared. And scared in this family comes out as cruel, because cruel feels safer than scared. He finally looked at her. I should know. I learned it from the same place he did. What's that? The morning crawled into afternoon with a kind of tension that didn't have anywhere to go. Mira, blissfully unaware of any of the undercurrents running through the house, attached herself to Nia almost immediately, dragging her into the playroom to host an elaborate tea party with stuffed animals that all apparently had names, jobs, and complicated feuds with each other that Nia had to learn the rules of in real time. Mr. Bear is mad at Captain Frog, Mira informed her solemnly, pouring imaginary tea, because Captain Frog ate his crackers. That's a serious crime, Nia said. It's very serious. Mira nodded, dead earnest. Daddy says you have to say sorry when you do something wrong, even if it's hard. Your daddy sounds smart. Mira considered this. He sat a lot. He doesn't think I notice, but I notice. She said it the way children say devastating things, completely without weight, completely without understanding the size of what they're handing you. Mommy used to make him not sad. Now nobody does. Nia's chest tightened in a way she wasn't prepared for. I'm sorry about your mom, sweetheart. It's okay. Mira poured more invisible tea. Juno says it's not okay to say it's okay. But I say it because if I don't say it, I cry, and then everyone gets sadder. She looked up at Nia with an expression far too old for a 6-year-old's face. Do you have a mommy? The question landed somewhere it had no business landing, somewhere old and scarred over that Nia had spent years learning not to touch. I did, she said carefully. She left when I was about your age. Where did she go? I don't know, she just left. Some people do that. Mira's face crumpled with the particular sympathy only children seemed capable of expressing without irony or performance. She abandoned her teacup entirely and crawled into Nia's lap, small and warm and unbearably trusting, and said, I'm sorry your mommy left you. That's the worst thing. A beat. You can be my mommy's friend if you want. I think she'd like you. Nia held the little girl and felt something crack open in her chest that she'd kept welded shut for years. Not breaking exactly, but unsealing, like a door she'd nailed boards across finally giving way under gentle pressure instead of force. She didn't notice Seojin standing in the doorway until she looked up and found him there, watching. his expression unguarded in a way she hadn't seen from him yet. Something raw and complicated, grief and gratitude tangled together so tightly they were indistinguishable. "She hasn't done that with anyone since her mother died," he said quietly, once Mira had wandered off to retrieve a fallen stuffed rabbit. "Climbed into someone's lap like that. Trusted someone that fast." "Kids are good judges of character," Nia said. "Better than adults sometimes." "Maybe." Seojin leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching his daughter chatter at her stuffed animals across the room. "Or maybe she's just desperate for someone to fill a hole that shouldn't exist in a kid that young." "Can't it be both?" He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had in the alley, like he was recalculating something. "You confessed something to me in the car yesterday," he said, "about not being able to have children. You said it like a confession, like you expected me to flinch." Nia's spine stiffened automatically. "Most people do." "I'm not most people." "Everyone says that. I mean it specifically." He uncrossed his arms, stepped further into the room, lowering his voice so Mira wouldn't catch the threat of it from across the carpet. "You think that makes you empty? Broken? Is that the word you use for it, in your head, when nobody's listening?" Nia's throat tightened. She hadn't told him the word. She hadn't told anyone the word. But somehow he'd landed on exactly the shape of the thing she carried, the precise outline of the wound. "Sometimes," she admitted, quiet. "My house is full of people who need love," Seojin said, his voice low and steady. No performance in it, no softness for the sake of softness. Just fact, delivered the way he delivered everything, plainly, without decoration. A boy who's furious at the universe for taking his mother. A little girl who's terrified of forgetting her face. A father who doesn't know how to fix either of them and is running out of ways to try. He held her gaze. "Tell me again how that makes you empty." Nia didn't have an answer. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the word broken. The word she'd built her entire self-image around, brick by brick, year by year, felt less like a verdict and more like something other people had handed her without her ever agreeing to carry it. The fragile peace lasted exactly until dinner. Juno came home from school in a mood that had clearly been building all day, slamming his backpack onto a kitchen chair hard enough to knock over a glass, refusing to look at anyone, picking at food he had no intention of eating. Mira chattered obliviously about her tea party. Seojin watched his son with the careful, exhausted patience of a man who'd had this exact dinner 100 times before and was bracing for the 101st. "I got a call from your school today," Seojin said finally, setting down his fork. Juno's shoulders went rigid. "So? So you got suspended for fighting. Want to tell me about that, or should I guess?" "Some kid said something about Mom." Juno's voice cracked, the anger in it suddenly thinner, more exposed than he probably wanted it to be. "I made him stop. By breaking his nose. By making him stop." Seojin's expression didn't change, but something tightened around his eyes. "You can't keep doing this. Every time something hurts you, you turn it into a fight. That's not strength, Juno. That's just what?" Juno's voice rose, sharp and brittle. "That's just what I learned watching you? You think I don't know what you do, Dad? You think I don't know what happened in that alley 2 nights ago? You broke a man's arm and you didn't even blink. So don't sit here and tell me not to fight when fighting is literally the family business." The kitchen went silent. Mira had stopped chattering, sensing the change in pressure the way children sense weather before adults do, her small face folding into worry. "That's different," Seojin said, quiet, controlled. But Nia could see the strain it cost him to keep it that way. "How is it different?" Juno was standing now, chair scraping against tile. "You protect people by hurting people. I protect myself the same way. That's not different. That's the same thing with a worse excuse attached. I do what I do so you never have to," Seojin said, and for the first time his voice cracked too, just slightly, just enough to reveal the man underneath the careful control. "I built all of this. The money, the protection, the walls around this house, so you and your sister would never have to learn the things I had to learn. So you'd never have to become what I had to become." "Too late," Juno said, and the cruelty in his voice was a child's cruelty, sharp-edged and aimed precisely because he knew exactly where it would land. "I already am what you are. I just don't have a fancy coat yet. He stormed out of the kitchen, and this time nobody followed him, the three remaining at the table, sitting in a silence so thick it felt like something you could choke on. Mira's lower lip trembled. Seo-jin sat with his head bowed slightly, hands flat on the table, breathing through something Nia couldn't name but recognized instantly, because she'd felt versions of it her whole life. The particular grief of watching someone you love absorb your worst qualities like a sponge and call it inheritance. He doesn't mean it, Nia said quietly, mostly to fill the silence, mostly because Mira's eyes were too wide and too scared. He means every word, Seo-jin said, not looking up. That's what makes it unbearable. He's not wrong. I am exactly what he says I am. I just spent so long trying to hide it from my own children that I forgot they were watching anyway. Tasa. 2 days later, the watching turned into something else. Nia was in the garden. Seo-jin's housekeeper had told her it was safe to walk there, within the fenced perimeter, with 2 guards always somewhere in view. When a black town car she didn't recognize pulled through the front gates without slowing down, tires crunching gravel with an aggression that felt deliberate. A woman stepped out before the driver had even fully stopped, moving like she owned every inch of ground beneath her heels, dressed in a coat that cost more than Nia would make in 3 years, dark hair pulled into a knot so severe it looked like it could cut glass. Seo-jin came out the front door fast, faster than Nia had seen him move except in the alley, his face shutting into a kind of controlled fury she hadn't witnessed yet. "Yura," he said, "this is not how you announce a visit. I don't announce visits to men who've spent 2 years dodging mine." Yurahan's eyes swept the property, found Nia standing frozen by the rose bushes, and narrowed with an expression that was somehow both bored and lethal at once. "So this is her. This doesn't concern you. It concerns the entire city, Seo-jin, and you know it." Yura's heels clicked against the gravel as she crossed the distance toward Nia with unhurried precision, the way a predator moves when it already knows the outcome and is simply enjoying the walk. "A waitress from a diner with—" Her eyes traced over Nia like she was reading a price tag. "Nothing. No family worth mentioning. No money. No future. You really brought this into your house, into your children's lives, over some alley rescue that's already turning every family in this city against you? Watch your tone," Seo-jin said low. "Or what?" Yura turned to face him fully, something almost desperate cracking through her composure for the first time. "You'll protect her the way you protect everyone you decide deserves it, while the rest of us who've been loyal to you for years get nothing? I have stood beside your family through every war you've fought. I have buried people for your sake. And you choose her?" Her voice cracked on the word, raw with something that wasn't just political outrage, something more personal, more wounded. "I didn't choose anything," Seo-jin said. "I saved a woman's life. That's all that happened." "That's never all that happens with you." Yura's eyes cut back to Nia, cold and assessing. "Tell me something, sweetheart. Did he tell you what he is? Did he tell you what happens to people who get close to men like him? Did he tell you about his wife?" The word landed like a slap. Nia saw something shift violently in Seo-jin's face. Not anger exactly. Something closer to old grief reopened without warning. "Yura, enough! Has he told you how she died?" Yura pressed on, ignoring him entirely now, focused entirely on Nia with a vicious kind of clarity. "Has he told you she got caught in the middle of exactly the kind of war you're about to be the center of? Has he told you that loving Kwon Seo-jin comes with a body count and you might be the next name on it?" "That's enough," Seo-jin said, and his voice had dropped into something genuinely dangerous now, something that made even Yura take half a step back despite herself. "You will leave. Now. And you will not come back to my house uninvited again." Yura stared at him for a long moment, something complicated and wounded flickering across her composed features before she smoothed it back down into something colder. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "She's nothing, Seo-jin. Barren, penniless, temporary. You'll throw away 2 years of alliance for something that won't even last a season." "Get off my property," Seo-jin said, and this time his voice left no room for argument at all. Yura held his gaze a beat longer, then turned and walked back to her car with the same deliberate, unhurried precision she'd arrived with, refusing to let the retreat look like one. and was gone in a spray of gravel a moment later, the gate swinging shut behind her like a held breath finally released. Nia stood frozen by the rose bushes, Yura's words still ringing in her ears. Nothing, barren, penniless, temporary. Each one finding the exact scar it was aimed at and pressing down hard. Seojin turned to her, his face still tight with fury that hadn't fully drained out of him yet. Don't listen to a word she said. She's not wrong about all of it, Nia said quietly. I am penniless. I am... The word stuck in her throat, ugly and familiar. I can't have kids. That's true. She just said it uglier than I usually let myself. None of that has anything to do with your worth. Seojin's voice softened, but the intensity underneath it didn't. I need you to hear that, Nia. Whatever you've been told about yourself, by her, by anyone, it's wrong. You don't know that, Nia said, and something in her, some old wound reopened by Yura's precision, finally cracked open into words. You don't know anything about me, really. You met me 3 days ago in an alley. You don't know what it's like to spend your whole life being the thing nobody wants. Not enough for your own mother to stay. Not enough for the one relationship that mattered to survive a hospital diagnosis. Not enough for anything except $11.40 and a job where I'm invisible by design. You don't get to tell me she's wrong when you don't actually know. Then tell me, Seojin said, stepping closer, his voice low and urgent. Tell me everything she doesn't know. I'm asking. Nia's breath caught. Nobody had ever actually asked. Not like that. Not with the expectation of staying to hear the answer. Before she could find words, Mira's voice rang out from the front door, small and scared. Daddy? Was that lady mean? Is Nia leaving because of the mean lady? Both adults turned to find Mira standing in the doorway, still in her school uniform, clutching her stuffed fox tightly to her chest, her eyes wide with the particular terror of a child who has already lost one important person and is bracing to lose another. I don't know, Peanut, Seojin said carefully, before Nia could answer. Nia crossed the gravel and crouched down to Mira's level, taking the little girl's free hand in both of hers. I'm not going anywhere because of some lady's words, she said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded, how much she meant it even as the words left her mouth. Words can't kick anyone out of anywhere. Only choices can, and I haven't made one of those. Mira's grip tightened around her fingers. Promise? Nia hesitated, the easy lie of yes, I promise dying in her throat, because she'd learned a long time ago what unkept promises did to a child's faith in the world, and she refused to be one more person who handed Mira a promise she might not keep. I promise I'm not leaving today. I promise that much. The rest, I can't see yet. Nobody can see that far. It wasn't the answer Mira wanted, but it was honest, and something in the little girl's face settled slightly at the honesty of it. The way children sometimes trust truth more than comfort. Once they've already learned, comfort can lie. That night, after both children were finally asleep, Nia found herself standing in the dark hallway outside the guest room, unable to sleep, her mind looping endlessly over Yura's words, over Juno's fury, over the particular vertigo of having stumbled into a family's worth of grief in the span of 3 days. She heard movement downstairs, quiet, careful, the specific sound of someone trying not to wake anyone, and found Seojin in his study, a single lamp burning, a bottle of something amber and untouched sitting on his desk beside a framed photograph she hadn't noticed before. She knocked softly on the open door. He looked up, surprised, and for a moment something unguarded crossed his face before he could school it back into composure. Can't sleep either, he said. Not a question. Too much to think about. She stepped inside, eyes drifting to the photograph on the desk. A woman with kind eyes and Mira's same smile, laughing at something outside the frame. Your wife? Seojin's hand moved instinctively toward the frame, not quite touching it, like even now, 2 years later, he wasn't sure he had the right to. Hana, he said quietly. She used to tell me I'd let the business eat every soft part of me if I wasn't careful. She was right, in the end. It ate her instead. What happened to her? He was quiet for a long moment, weighing something, and Nia understood instinctively that whatever answer came next would change the shape of everything that came after it. She got caught between two families during a negotiation that went wrong, he said finally, his voice flat with the particular control of a man who has told himself this story so many times the words have lost their original shape. She wasn't supposed to be there. She came to bring me lunch, of all things. Some stupid, ordinary errand, the kind of thing wives do without thinking. And she walked into the middle of a meeting that turned violent in about 4 seconds. I wasn't fast enough. His jaw clenched, the only outward sign of the storm clearly raging underneath. I am never not fast enough again. That's the promise I made over her funeral, and it's the only promise in my life I've actually managed to keep. Nia sat down slowly in the chair across from his desk, the weight of his confession settling over both of them like something physical. Yura was trying to scare me away with that, telling me what happens to women who get close to you. She wasn't wrong to try, Seojin said. It's not an unreasonable fear to plant. I've buried one woman already because of who I am. I don't know what kind of man invites someone else into that kind of risk twice. You didn't invite me, Nia said quietly. I walked into your alley on my own. You just happened to be the one who stepped out of the dark. That's not how it feels from where I'm sitting. He finally looked up at her, and the rawness in his eyes was something she hadn't yet seen from him. Not the controlled stillness of the alley, not the careful authority of the house, just a tired, grieving man staring at a choice he hadn't planned on having to make. I keep telling myself I'm doing this because it's right, protecting you, housing you. But Yura asked me a question out there that I haven't been able to answer since she left, and it's eating me alive. What question? Whether I'm protecting you, he said, or whether I just don't want to lose another person I've decided matters. His voice dropped lower, raw. Because somewhere between that alley and this study, Nia Bell, you stopped being a stranger I rescued and started being someone I think about every hour I'm not looking directly at you. And I don't know what to do with that, because the last time I let myself care about someone this much, I buried her in the ground 3 weeks later. The room went very still. Outside, somewhere in the dark beyond the windows, a guard's footsteps crunched slowly across gravel, a reminder of the constant vigilance this house required just to keep breathing. Nia sat with his confession settling into her chest like something too large for the space it had been given, and felt the careful walls she'd built around her own heart. Walls built from a lifetime of disappearing acts and closed doors, and the specific loneliness of being unwanted, begin to tremble at their foundations. I don't know what to do with it either, she admitted finally. Nobody's ever said something like that to me before. Nobody's ever looked at Broken and seen something worth keeping. I don't see Broken, Seojin said, standing now, crossing the small distance of the study until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head up to hold his gaze, the lamplight catching the exhaustion and the want both, tangled together in his face. I see someone who survived things that should have ended her, and is still standing here, still soft enough to let my daughter crawl into her lap on day 3. That's not broken, Nia. That's the opposite of broken. That's the hardest kind of hole there is. Her breath caught somewhere between her ribs. For one long, suspended moment, the distance between them felt like it might close entirely. And then, from somewhere upstairs, a child's scream tore through the silence of the house, raw and terrified, and both of them were moving before either had consciously decided to. They found Mira sitting bolt upright in her bed, drenched in sweat, screaming for her mother in a voice that hadn't fully woken up yet, still trapped somewhere in whatever nightmare had clawed its way out of her sleep. Seojin reached her first, gathering her shaking body against his chest, murmuring low and constant in a language Nia didn't understand, but recognized instantly as the universal grammar of comfort. And over his shoulder, through the dim nightlight glow of the room, Nia caught sight of Juno standing frozen in his own doorway across the hall, watching his little sister fall apart with an expression of such raw, helpless grief that it stripped away every layer of teenage cruelty he'd worn like armor for the last 3 days, leaving behind nothing but a scared boy who had also lost his mother and had nobody to scream for in the middle of the night because he'd decided somewhere along the way that boys his age didn't get to scream anymore. Nia crossed the hall toward him before she'd fully decided to, some old instinct pulling her forward, and crouched down so they were eye level. "Hey," she said quietly. "I'm fine," Juno said automatically, the way she herself had said fine 100 times in her life, the lie so practiced it came out smooth as water. "You don't have to be fine right now," she said. "Not at 2 in the morning. Not when your sister's screaming and you're standing in the dark watching it happen, helpless, with nobody to scream for either. Something in Juno's carefully maintained wall cracked, just a hairline fracture, just enough for his eyes to go suddenly, devastatingly wet. I used to be the one who calmed her down, he said, voice raw. Before, I used to know what to say. Now I just stand here. You're not standing here doing nothing, Nia said gently. You're standing here because you love her too much to walk away, even when it hurts to watch. That's not nothing, Juno. That's the whole thing. He stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. And for the first time since she'd arrived in this house, he didn't say anything cruel at all. He just nodded once, small and uncertain, and let her stand beside him in the hallway. Two people who understood loss in different shapes, watching a little girl finally settle back into sleep in her father's arms, while the house around them held its breath, fragile and unfinished, balanced on the edge of something none of them could yet name. But the fragile peace of that night didn't survive until morning. It started with a phone call before dawn, Seojin's private line, the one that never rang unless something had already gone wrong. Nia woke to the sound of his voice carrying sharp and low through the wall, separating the guest room from his study. Words she couldn't fully make out, but whose tone she understood instantly. Controlled fury wrapped around real fear. By the time she made her way downstairs, dressed in borrowed clothes that still didn't quite fit right, she found him standing at the kitchen window, phone still in hand, staring out at the gray pre-dawn light, like it owed him an explanation. What happened? She asked. Yura didn't just leave angry yesterday, he said, not turning around. She left and made a phone call. To the Han family's allies. The June Syndicate, specifically. People who've been looking for an excuse to test whether I've gone soft since Hana died. His knuckles whitened around the phone. They know where you're staying. They know I've put men on your protection. And this morning, one of my contacts inside their organization sent word that they're planning to do something about it. Soon. Nia's stomach dropped. Do something? Meaning what? Seojin finally turned to face her, and what she saw in his expression wasn't the careful control she'd grown used to. It was something closer to the man in the alley. Coiled, dangerous, ready. Meaning they think the fastest way to humiliate me, he said, is to take something I've decided to protect. And right now, Nia, that's you. The words hung in the kitchen air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Outside, the first guards of the morning shift were already moving with a new urgency along the perimeter fence, and somewhere upstairs, Mira's small footsteps padded across the floor, oblivious still to the storm gathering on the other side of every locked door in this house. Nia felt the floor of her careful, 3-day-old new life tilt sharply beneath her feet. Not the slow shift she'd felt in the car after the alley, but something sudden and final. The unmistakable sound of a door closing somewhere behind her that would never open again. What do we do? She asked. Seojin set the phone down on the counter with deliberate, controlled care, the same care he'd used dismantling 3 armed men 3 nights ago. We make sure, he said quietly, that there's nothing left of them to come back twice. The kitchen felt smaller after that, the air thicker, like the house itself had heard Seojin's words and tightened its walls in response. Nia stood by the counter watching him move through the room with sudden, sharp efficiency, pulling open a drawer she hadn't noticed before, retrieving a phone she'd never seen, dialing a number from memory without looking at the screen. Pull everyone back to the house, he said into it, voice flat and fast. Full lockdown. Nobody in, nobody out, until I say otherwise. A pause, listening. I don't care what it costs. Do it. He hung up, set the second phone down beside the first, and finally looked at her. Really looked, the way he had in the alley, like he was recalculating the entire shape of the danger in front of him. You should eat something, he said. Mira will be down soon. I don't want her seeing either of us like this. Like what? Scared, he said, and the honesty of the word, delivered so plainly, frightened her more than anything else he'd said all morning. Us. The lockdown happened fast and without ceremony. By mid-morning, the estate had transformed. Guards doubled at every entrance. Black SUVs parked at angles along the gravel drive like teeth. The iron gates sealed and reinforced with something that hummed faintly when Nia walked too close. Juno noticed immediately, of course, because Juno noticed everything, his suspicion sharpening into something almost feral as he watched men he recognized take up positions they'd never held before. Something's happening, he said, cornering his father in the hallway outside the study. Tell me. It doesn't concern you. Everything in this house concerns me. Juno's voice cracked with the specific fury of a child who has decided, somewhere along the way, that being lied to is worse than being scared. You keep saying that. It doesn't concern you. It's not your problem. Don't worry about it. And then Mom died anyway, without anyone warning either of us, and I had to find out from a teacher pulling me out of class instead of from you. Seojin's face went still in a way Nia recognized now. The specific stillness of a man absorbing a wound he knew he deserved. You're right, he said quietly. I should have told you more then. I'm telling you now. The Han family's allies think I've gone soft. They're planning something against this house, possibly against Nia specifically, and I am not going to let that happen again. That's all I know right now. The second I know more, you'll know more. That's a promise, Juno, not a deflection. Juno studied him for a long moment, something in his posture finally softening half a degree, the armor cracking just enough to let something younger and more frightened show through. Okay, he said finally. Okay, then quieter. Just don't let her end up like Mom. I don't think Mira survives losing too. He walked away before Seojin could answer, and Nia, who'd been standing just out of sight in the next room, felt the words land somewhere deep and unprotected in her chest. Not fear for herself exactly, but a new and terrifying awareness of how much weight she'd somehow already accumulated in this family's fragile architecture. Weight she hadn't asked for and didn't know how to safely carry. It was detective-turned-fixer Hae Won, Seojin's oldest and most trusted lieutenant, a wiry man with a permanently unreadable face who'd been with the family since before Juno was born, who brought the first piece of real information that afternoon. He found Seojin in the study, Nia seated nearby because Seojin had stopped pretending he wanted her out of the room days ago, and dropped a manila folder on the desk with the particular care of a man delivering something he didn't want to be the one delivering. The June Syndicate isn't acting alone, Haewon said. Someone fed them information, detailed information, security rotations, gate codes, even the layout of the East Wing. He paused. Someone inside. The temperature of the room seemed to drop. Who? Seojin said. Not a question. A demand. I don't have a name yet, but the leak's recent, within the last week, which narrows things considerably. Haewon's eyes flicked almost imperceptibly toward Nia, then back to Seojin. I'm not accusing anyone yet. I'm telling you what the timeline says. Say what you mean, Seojin said, voice gone dangerously soft. I mean, Haewon said carefully, that the only new variable in this house in the last week is sitting in that chair. Nia felt the air leave her lungs like she'd been struck. You think I didn't say that, Haewon said, though his tone suggested he hadn't entirely ruled it out either. I haven't left this property since I got here, Nia said, standing now, her voice shaking with something that was half fear and half outrage. I don't have a phone. I don't know anyone who'd want to hurt this family. I don't even know the gate codes. How could I possibly— Enough, Seojin said, sharp enough to cut through both their voices at once. He looked at Haewon with something cold settling into his expression. She's not the leak. Look elsewhere. With respect, Haewon said, you're not exactly objective right now. I said look elsewhere. The words came out like stone. I trust her. Haewon held his gaze a moment longer, some old loyalty warring visibly with professional caution, then nodded once and gathered his folder. I'll keep digging, he said, and left without another word, leaving behind a silence that felt thicker than the one before it. Nia sat back down slowly, hands trembling in her lap. He thinks I did this. He's wrong. Are you sure? The question slipped out before she could stop it, some old self-doubt rising fast and ugly to the surface. You barely know me, Seojin. 4 days. You've known me 4 days and you're staking your family's safety on the idea that I'm not capable of betraying you for money I clearly need. Is that what you're capable of? Seojin asked, quiet, steady, no accusation in it at all. Just a real question, asked plainly. No, Nia said, and the certainty in her own voice surprised her. But I understand why he'd ask. I don't, Seojin said, because I've watched you with my children for 4 days, And whatever you are, Nia Bell, you are not someone capable of selling out the people who let you sleep safe for the first time in years. I know that the way I know which way is up." She wanted desperately to believe him, but some small, cold part of her, the part shaped by a lifetime of being doubted, abandoned, found wanting, kept circling back to the same quiet terror. The trust this vast, this complete, was exactly the kind of thing that got people killed in houses like this one. The twist came 2 days later, and it came from a direction nobody had been watching. Nia was in the garden again, under closer guard than before, when Haewon approached her directly. Alone, no Seo-jin, his expression carrying none of its usual careful neutrality. "Walk with me," he said. Somewhere the cameras don't reach. Every instinct in her body screamed not to. But something in his face, not threat exactly, more like a man carrying information too heavy to set down anywhere safe, made her follow him to the far edge of the rose hedges, out of sight of the house. "I found the leak," he said, once they'd stopped. "Who?" Haewon hesitated, and in that hesitation, Nia felt the floor of the world shift again, the way it had in the SUV the night Seo-jin first told her she was now his problem. "It's not who you think," he said. "It's not staff. It's not new hires." He met her eyes directly. "It's Yurahan's contact inside this house, someone who's been feeding her information for over a year, long before you ever walked into that alley." "Then why does this concern me?" "Because the contact," Haewon said slowly, "is the same person who orchestrated the attack 3 nights ago. The same person who sent the men who cornered you, not randomly, deliberately, to create exactly the situation that happened. Seo-jin stepping in, marking you, destabilizing his alliance with the Han family." "Asasmamuki pasi taimt." He paused, letting the words land fully before continuing. "You weren't an accident, Nia. You were bait. Someone wanted Seo-jin distracted, wanted his attention split, wanted his judgment compromised exactly when it needed to be sharpest. And it worked perfectly." The world tilted sideways. Nia's hand found the rose hedge beside her without permission from her brain, thorns biting into her palm, grounding her against a truth too large to process standing upright. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Nobody knew me. Nobody could have planned." "They didn't need to know you specifically," Haewon said. "They needed a vulnerable woman, alone, in that alley, at that hour, and the rest would happen the way it always happens with Seo-jin. He can't watch someone get hurt without stepping in. That's not a flaw they discovered recently. That's a flaw they've been watching for years, waiting for the right moment to exploit." "Who?" Nia said, voice barely audible. "Who planned this?" Haewon's face tightened, like he hadn't wanted to be the one to say the next part out loud. "Yurahan didn't act alone either," he said. "She had help from inside this house, from someone who wanted Seo-jin distracted and weakened just as badly as she did, for reasons that have nothing to do with alliances or marriage." He let out a slow breath. "The informant is Director Min, Seo-jin's head of household security, the man who's run this estate's protection for 6 years, the man Seo-jin trusts more than almost anyone alive." Nia's knees nearly buckled. Director Min, the quiet, efficient man who checked her room for safety hazards on her first night, who'd nodded politely to her every morning in the hallway, who Seo-jin spoke of with the easy confidence of unquestioned loyalty. "Why would he—" "Money," Haewon said simply. "Min's brother owes the June Syndicate a debt large enough to ruin 3 lifetimes. They offered to forgive it in exchange for information. He took the deal 8 months ago, long before you arrived. You just happened to walk into the exact kind of opportunity his handlers had been waiting for." Nia pressed a hand against her chest, trying to slow a heartbeat that had gone wild and erratic. "Does Seo-jin know?" "Not yet." Haewon's eyes were steady, careful. "I wanted you to hear it first." "Why me?" "Because," Haewon said, voice dropping lower, "when Seo-jin finds out the man he's trusted for 6 years sold his children's safety for his brother's debt, he is not going to react like a careful man. He's going to react like the man who tore 3 strangers apart in an alley without raising his voice. Except this time, the betrayal is personal, and personal makes men like him reckless. I need you to understand what's coming, Nia, because you may be the only person in this house he'll actually listen to when it does." Before Nia could fully absorb the weight of that responsibility, a sound cracked across the garden. Not loud, but wrong. The particular pop of a silenced weapon discharging somewhere near the east wing of the house. Heywan's expression transformed instantly, professional calm snapping into something hard and immediate. "Get to the house," he said. "Now, stay low." They ran. The east wing was chaos by the time they reached it. Guards shouting coordinates Nia couldn't parse, Seojin's voice cutting through the noise with a clarity that made her chest ache with relief just to hear it, alive, commanding, furious. She found him in the hallway outside Mira's room, weapon drawn, his face a mask of controlled violence she hadn't seen since the alley. "Where's Mira?" Nia gasped. "Safe room." "Juno's with her." His eyes found Nia's, and something in them flickered with relief before snapping back to focus. Director Min just tried to access the safe room override codes. Heywan's men stopped him before he got through. The name landed like confirmation of everything Heywan had just told her. Nia watched Seojin's face as the pieces visibly assembled themselves behind his eyes. Min's recent insistence on reviewing security protocols personally, his unusual questions about the children's exact schedule, small details that meant nothing alone and everything together. "It's him," Seojin said slowly, voice gone cold and flat in a way that frightened her more than shouting would have. "Min sold us out." Seojin, 6 years, he said, not really to her, more to himself, the words coming out clipped and disbelieving. 6 years I trusted that man with my children's lives. I let him into rooms I don't let anyone into. I told him things about Hana's death I've never told another living soul. His hand tightened around the weapon at his side, knuckles white. And he sold all of it. For what? Money? A debt? Heywan said it was his brother's debt to the June Syndicate, Nia said carefully, watching the way Seojin's whole body had gone rigid with a fury that seemed to be vibrating just beneath a thinning surface of control. His brother's debt. Seojin laughed, short and ugly, nothing like a real laugh at all. He put my daughter's life on a scale against his brother's debt and decided his brother weighed more. Down the hall, a door burst open, and Director Min himself stumbled into view, 2 of Heywan's men gripping his arms, his composed professional face now slack with terror, all pretense finally stripped away. He saw Seojin and went immediately, desperately still, the way prey goes still in front of something that has already decided to kill it. "Seojin," Min said, voice cracking. "Let me explain." "Explain." Seojin's voice was deathly quiet now, more dangerous than any volume could have been. "Explain how long you've been selling my children's safety to the people who killed their mother's protection detail 2 years ago." Min flinched at the connection, and in that flinch, Nia watched something else crack open. A horror beneath the horror, a question forming in Seojin's eyes that hadn't existed a second earlier. "You said 2 years, Seojin said, very slowly, very carefully, like a man approaching a bomb he's just realized is live. "Min, how long? How long have you actually been compromised?" Min's silence stretched a half-second too long, and that silence, more than any confession, told Seojin everything. "No," Seojin whispered. "I didn't have a choice," Min said, words tumbling out fast now, desperate. "They came to me before Hana even died. The debt was already crushing my brother by then. I thought if I just gave them small things, nothing that mattered, I could manage it, control it." "Did you know," Seojin said, and his voice had dropped into something Nia had never heard from him, something that didn't sound human anymore, "that they were going to be at that negotiation, the day Hana died? Did you know?" The hallway went absolutely silent. Nia felt her own heart stop along with everyone else's, the full horrifying shape of the twist finally coming into view. Not just a recent betrayal, not just a leak feeding information to enemies in the present, but something far older, far worse, a wound that had been festering since before Nia had ever set foot in that alley. "I didn't know they'd hurt her," Min said, and he was crying now, the words barely intelligible through it. "I swear to you, I never thought they'd actually—" Seojin moved before anyone could stop him, the weapon in his hand suddenly irrelevant, his bare hands finding Min's collar and slamming him against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster, his face inches from the other man's. Every ounce of the controlled stillness Nia had come to associate with him completely, catastrophically gone. "You knew," Seojin said, voice shaking now with a rage that had clearly been buried under 2 years of careful grief, finally finding an outlet violent enough to match it. "You knew what they were capable of, and you let her walk into that room anyway, because covering your own debt mattered more than warning the woman who used to bring you coffee every morning. You let my wife die for your silence." "Seojin, stop!" Haewon's voice, urgent, trying to pull him back. But Seojin didn't move, didn't loosen his grip, his whole body coiled with 2 years of grief finally finding a target it could actually touch. It was Nia who moved next, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at her to stay back, placing a hand flat against Seojin's rigid arm. "Seojin," her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Look at me." He didn't, not at first, his eyes locked on Min's terrified face with an intensity that frightened her down to the bone. "Seojin," she said again, sharper this time, "if you kill him right now with your own hands, in front of witnesses, with Juno's room 30 feet away, you become exactly what Juno already thinks you are. You prove every accusation he threw at you in that kitchen. Is that what you want him to inherit? Is that the lesson you want both your children to learn about what happens when someone hurts this family?" Something in Seojin's posture shifted, not relaxing exactly, but redirecting, the rage still there but suddenly aimed somewhere more controlled. He held Min against the wall a moment longer, breathing hard, and then released him abruptly, stepping back, chest heaving. "Lock him in the basement holding room," Seojin said to Haewon, voice still shaking but no longer entirely consumed. "I want him alive. I want him conscious, and I want every piece of information in his head before I decide what happens to him." Haewon's men dragged Min away, and the hallway slowly emptied, leaving Seojin standing alone with Nia in the wreckage of a betrayal 2 years deep, his hands still trembling, his face a battlefield of grief and fury he'd clearly never let anyone witness before. "She's been dead 2 years, he said quietly, almost to himself, "and I just found out the man I trusted to guard my children let it happen. That he's known the whole time, that he's been sitting at my dinner table watching my kids grow up without their mother, knowing exactly why she isn't here." "I know," Nia said softly. "I don't know how to hold this," Seojin admitted, and the rawness of the confession, coming from a man who controlled everything, who dismantled 3 armed strangers without raising his voice, broke something open in Nia's chest. "I don't know what to do with a betrayal this size. I've buried enemies. I've buried allies who turned. I've never had to bury someone twice, once in the ground, and now again, finding out the burial itself was a lie someone let happen on purpose." Nia didn't have a perfect answer. There wasn't one. But she stepped closer, closing the distance that had defined every interaction between them since that first night in the alley, and put her arms around him. Not as a gesture of romance, not in that moment, but as the simplest, oldest form of human comfort there was. The kind she'd never received enough of herself and had learned somehow exactly how to give. Seojin stood rigid for a moment, unused to being held, unused to being the one who needed holding instead of providing it. And then slowly, something in him broke loose, his arms coming around her with a desperate, shaking grip, his face pressed into her shoulder as 2 years of carefully buried grief finally found a place safe enough to surface. They stood like that for a long moment in the wrecked hallway, plaster dust settling around them, the muffled sound of Min being dragged away echoing faintly from somewhere below. It was Juno's voice that broke the silence, small, scared, standing in the doorway of the safe room with Mira's hand gripped tight in his own. "Dad?" the boy said, his earlier fury entirely gone now, replaced by something younger and more frightened. "What's happening? Is it over?" Seojin pulled back from Nia slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand, visibly forcing himself back into the shape of a father his children needed to see. "It's not over," he said honestly, because he'd promised Juno honesty days ago, and he intended to keep that promise even now, even broken. "But we found who was helping them, and we're going to make sure they can't hurt us again." "Was it someone we know?" Juno asked, something in his voice suggesting he already suspected the answer was worse than a stranger. Seojin's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said simply. "It was someone we trusted." Mira's small face crumpled. The particular terror of a child realizing that danger doesn't only come from outside the walls, that the people inside the house could be the ones who let the wolves in. And it was in that exact moment, with Mira beginning to cry, Juno's face draining of color, plaster dust still settling around them, and Director Min's confession still ringing in everyone's ears like a verdict, that Haewon's voice cracked over the hallway radio, sharp and urgent, in a way that stopped every heart in the building cold. Seojin. We have a problem. Min wasn't working alone inside the house. There's a second device, already armed, already counting down, and it's not in the East Wing. Sojin's face went white. Where? He said. Haewon's answer, when it finally came through the static, was the single worst word any of them could have heard in that moment. Because it meant every plan, every lockdown, every careful protection Seojin had built around his children in the last 6 years had already failed, had already been breached from the inside, and there were only seconds left to do anything about it at all. Haewon's voice cracked again through the radio, faster now, words tumbling over each other. The safe room. It's wired into the safe room ventilation system. Min's people built it into the renovation 8 months ago. It's been sitting there the whole time, waiting. Seojin didn't hesitate. He moved. Get them out, he barked, already running, Nia right behind him, her bare feet slapping against marble as adrenaline blew through her exhaustion like a furnace catching fire. Get them out now! Get them out now! Juno scooped Mira up without being told twice, her small body shaking, her face buried in his neck, and the four of them tore down the hallway together, Haewon's voice still crackling directions through the radio clipped to Seojin's collar, every word landing like a hammer blow. West stairwell, it's clear! Go now! Go! They hit the stairwell at a dead run. Nia's lungs burned, each breath tearing at her throat, but she didn't slow, couldn't slow, because Mira's terrified eyes kept finding hers over Juno's shoulder, and something primal in her chest refused to let that little girl see fear on her face, even as her own heart slammed so hard against her ribs it physically hurt. How long? Seojin shouted into the radio, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I don't know. Min's not talking specifics. Could be minutes, could be seconds. Just move. They burst out a side door into the gray afternoon light, gravel biting into Nia's bare feet, the cold air hitting her lungs like a slap. Guards were already converging from every direction, weapons drawn, faces tight with the particular controlled panic of professionals who have trained for exactly this and still feel their own pulse hammering anyway. Clear the perimeter, Seojin shouted. Everyone back, 200 meters now. They were 40 feet from the house when it happened. The East Wing, the wing they'd just run through, the wing where Mira's bedroom and the safe room both sat, erupted in a concussion of sound and light that swallowed every other noise in the world. The shockwave hit Nia like a physical wall, knocking the air from her chest, and she felt herself falling before she fully understood what had happened, Seojin's arm suddenly around her, twisting his body to take the brunt of the impact as they both hit the gravel hard. For one long, ringing, silent moment, the world simply stopped. Then sound came rushing back, Mira screaming, Juno shouting something incoherent, the groan of structural damage settling somewhere behind them, glass raining down in a glittering, terrible shower across the lawn. Nia's ears rang so loud she could barely hear her own voice when she found it. Mira, she's fine, Juno's got her. Seojin was already pulling Nia upright, his hands running over her with frantic clinical urgency, checking for blood, for breaks, his face inches from hers, eyes wild with a fear she'd never seen on him before. Not in the alley, not anywhere. Are you hurt? Nia, look at me. Are you hurt? I'm okay, she gasped, though her palms were torn open from the gravel and her ears wouldn't stop ringing. I'm okay, go check on them. He was already moving, scrambling across the lawn to where Juno had curled his body protectively over Mira's smaller one, both of them coated in dust and debris but breathing, alive, intact. Seojin gathered them both against him, one arm around each, his whole body shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline and terror finally catching up to him all at once. We're okay, Juno kept repeating, more to himself than to anyone else, his voice cracked and small. We're okay. Behind them, the east wing of the house burned, black smoke pouring up into the gray sky. The wreckage of 6 years of careful security finally laid bare in fire and broken stone. There was no time to process it. Haywan was already shouting new coordinates, new threats, the radio screaming with chatter from every guard on the property. Movement at the south fence, multiple hostiles, breaching now. The explosion hadn't been the end of the attack. It had been the opening move. What followed happened too fast for Nia's mind to fully catalog. Fragmented into pieces she would only be able to assemble afterward, in the quiet, when her hands finally stopped shaking. Armed men poured through a breach in the south fence. 8, maybe 10, moving with the disciplined coordination of people who'd planned this for weeks, who'd known exactly when the security would be split between fire response and perimeter defense. Seojin's guards engaged immediately, the controlled chaos of gunfire erupting across the lawn, and Seojin himself was suddenly transformed in front of Nia's eyes, the grieving father gone, replaced entirely by the man from the alley, cold and fast and lethal, weapon drawn, voice cutting through the noise with absolute command. "Get them to the cars!" he shouted at Nia, shoving Juno and Mira toward her. "The garage, west side, go now." "What about you?" "Go!" His eyes locked on hers for 1/2 second, fierce and certain. "Keep them alive. That's the only thing that matters right now. Go." She went. She grabbed Mira's hand and Juno's sleeve and ran. Ran like she'd never run in her life, gravel and broken glass tearing at her bare feet, smoke stinging her eyes, the sound of gunfire and shouting chasing them across the lawn toward the garage's side entrance. They didn't make it. 2 men cut across their path from the east, faces hidden behind dark masks, and Nia's body reacted before her mind caught up. She shoved both children behind her, putting herself bodily between them and the threat, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Run!" she screamed at Juno. "Take her and run! Don't stop! I'm not leaving you! Run!" One of the masked men lunged for her, and Nia? $11.40, diner shoes, a lifetime of being told she was too small to matter, found something in herself she didn't know existed, some buried feral instinct, and she fought. She clawed. She screamed. She drove her knee up hard enough to drop him to the gravel, every ounce of fear and fury from the last week pouring out through her hands and elbows and teeth. The second man grabbed her from behind, an arm locking around her throat, and the world started to gray at the edges, her vision tunneling, her hands clawing uselessly at an arm she couldn't budge. And then the pressure vanished. The man was simply gone, thrown clear, and Seojin was there, blood running from a cut above his eye, his weapon discarded somewhere in the chaos, his bare hands finishing what they'd started in that alley 5 days ago with the same brutal, efficient precision, except this time there was nothing controlled about it at all. This time it was personal. This time it was rage given a target. It was over in seconds. Both men down, unmoving, and Seojin standing over them, chest heaving, blood mixing with sweat down the side of his face, his eyes finding Nia's with a desperation that cracked something open in her chest. "I'm fine," she gasped. And this time the word wasn't armor, wasn't a lie. It was simply true. And the relief that crossed his face at hearing it was the most naked thing she'd seen from him yet. "The garage," he said, voice ragged. "Now, all of you. I mean it this time." They made it to the garage, to one of the armored SUVs idling with a guard already behind the wheel, and Seojin physically lifted Mira into the back seat himself, his hands shaking as he buckled her in, his composure finally completely gone. "Daddy, you're bleeding," Mira whispered, small fingers reaching for the cut above his eye. "I'm okay, Peanut. I need you to be brave for me a little longer, okay? Just a little longer. Are you coming with us?" Seojin hesitated, and in that hesitation, Nia understood exactly what he was about to say before he said it. "I have to finish this," he said quietly. "I can't run, Peanut. If I run, they'll just come back again and again. I need to make sure they never come back." "No." Mira's small hands grabbed at his sleeve, panic flooding her face. "No, Daddy, please, don't go back there, please." "Mira." Nia's voice came out steadier than she felt, crouching down to the little girl's level, taking her shaking hands in her own. "Look at me. Hey, look at me." Mira's terrified eyes found hers, wide and brimming with tears, and Nia held her gaze with everything she had left. "You are not alone," Nia said, the words coming from somewhere deep and old, The exact words she'd needed someone to say to her 1,000 times over 1,000 lonely nights and never received. Whatever happens, whatever you're scared of right now, you are not alone. I'm right here. Juno's right here. We're not going anywhere. Do you understand me? Mira's small chin trembled, but something in her settled, anchored by the certainty in Nia's voice. You promise? I promise, Nia said. And this time she let herself say it fully, without hedging, because some promises were worth the risk of breaking them. Seojin watched this exchange with an expression Nia couldn't fully read, grief and gratitude and something fiercer than either tangled together. And then he turned to the guard behind the wheel. Safe house protocol. You know where. Don't stop for anything. He looked back at Nia, his hand finding hers for one brief, desperate second. Keep them safe. Seojin, I have to end this, he said, voice breaking slightly on the words. Min's people are still out there. The June Syndicate isn't going to stop until either I'm dead or they are. I can't protect my children from inside a moving car forever, Nia. I have to go back and finish it. Then I'm staying too. No. His grip on her hand tightened. You're not staying. You're going with them. They need you more than I do right now. They need their father alive, Nia said fiercely. And you running back into gunfire alone is not how that happens. Let me help. You don't know how to fight a war, Nia. I just put a grown man on the ground with my bare hands 30 seconds ago, she shot back. So don't tell me what I don't know how to do. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe? Or the beginning of something that looked almost like respect. But before he could respond, Haewon's voice exploded through the radio again, frantic in a way Nia hadn't heard from him yet. Seojin, they've breached the inner perimeter. They're inside the house. And Seojin, they're not just here for the girl anymore. Min just confessed everything before they got to him. They're here for you. All of it. They mean to finish this today, one way or another. Seojin's face went hard, every soft thing in it locking back down into something forged and merciless. Go, he said to the driver. And then, to Nia, his hand cupping her face for one fierce, desperate second. I will come back. Do you hear me? I will come back for you. You'd better, she whispered. The SUV door slammed, the engine roared, and Nia watched through the rear window as Seojin turned and ran back toward the burning house, back toward gunfire and smoke, and a war that had been building for 2 years and was finally, catastrophically, coming to its end. And she understood, with a clarity that settled cold and certain in her chest, that whatever happened in the next hour would decide not just whether they survived, but who they would all become on the other side of it. The SUV hadn't gone 200 meters down the access road before the radio crackled to life with Haewon's voice again, and this time what he said made the driver slam the brakes so hard Nia's seatbelt cut into her chest. Belay that order. Belay the safe house. The access road's compromised. They've got a second team waiting at the rendezvous point. If you drive into that, you're driving straight into them. Nia's stomach dropped through the floor of the car. What do we do? The driver's eyes found hers in the rear-view mirror, grim and calculating. We go back, he said. It's the only place with enough firepower to actually protect them now, Mira whimpered, burying her face in Juno's shoulder. And Juno, pale, shaking, but holding his sister with a fierce protective grip Nia hadn't seen from him before, looked up and met her eyes with something that, for the first time since she'd arrived in this house, looked less like suspicion and more like an alliance forged in fire. Back to the house, Juno said quietly. Back to Dad. No. The SUV turned, tires screaming against gravel, and sped back toward the smoke rising black against the gray afternoon sky, back toward a battle that was about to reach its final, unbearable pitch. And Nia held both children close, her own heart hammering with a fear she refused to let show on her face, bracing herself for whatever waited for them in the wreckage of the only home she'd had in longer than she could remember. The SUV skidded to a stop at the edge of the gravel drive, smoke pouring across the lawn in thick gray ribbons, and Nia had the doors open before the driver had even fully braked. Stay behind me, she told the children, voice steadier than her hands. Stay low. Juno didn't argue this time. He gripped Mira's hand and followed Nia's lead, the three of them moving along the tree line toward the house, ducking behind the burned-out husk of a guard post for cover. Gunfire still cracked somewhere near the south fence, sporadic now, dying down the way a storm dies down. not all at once, but in diminishing bursts, like something exhausting itself. Then she saw him. Seo Jin stood in the wreckage of the East Wing's collapsed wall, facing down the last two of the June Syndicate's men, his shirt torn open at the shoulder, blood soaking through in a dark, spreading stain. He was breathing hard, swaying slightly, but his eyes were locked and merciless, and even half broken, even bleeding. He looked like the most dangerous thing on that entire lawn. "It's over," he said to the men in front of him, voice carrying across the smoke and ruin. "Min's confessed. Your handlers are already being rounded up. Whatever you were promised for finishing this, it's not coming. So you can put the guns down, or you can join the 4 men already on the ground behind you." One of the men hesitated, the other didn't. He raised his weapon, and Naya's scream tore out of her before she'd even decided to make a sound. Seo Jin moved first. He always moved first. He closed the distance in a blur of motion that shouldn't have been possible from a man bleeding as badly as he was. And the weapon discharged into empty air as he drove the man to the ground. And then there was a brutal, ugly, finite few seconds of violence that ended with only one man standing. The last attacker dropped his weapon and ran, the same way the third man had run from that alley 5 days ago, except this time nobody let him go easily. 2 of Haewon's men cut him off at the fence line and brought him down hard. And then, for the first time in what felt like hours, the lawn went quiet. Seo Jin stood in the wreckage, chest heaving, blood running freely down his arm now, and his eyes found Nia across the smoke-choked distance between them. Something in his face broke open, relief so total it looked almost like pain, and he started toward her, each step heavier than the last, his legs finally beginning to register the damage his body had been ignoring for the last 20 minutes. He made it halfway before his knees buckled. "Seo Jin!" Nia was running before she'd consciously decided to, dropping to the gravel beside him as he caught himself on one hand, blood pooling dark beneath his shoulder. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare do this now, after everything!" "I'm okay," he gasped, and the word was a lie, the first lie she'd ever heard from him, his face gone pale and slick with sweat. "Just need a minute." "You're not okay, you're bleeding out. Somebody get a medic." Her voice cracked on the last word, raw with a fear that had nothing performative left in it. Haewon was already there, pressing a torn strip of fabric against the wound, shouting orders to the men converging around them, and through the chaos Nia kept her hands pressed against Seo Jin's face, forcing his eyes to stay on hers, refusing to let him slip away into whatever dark place blood loss was trying to pull him toward. "Stay with me," she said, fierce, desperate. "You promised Mira you'd come back. You promised me. Don't you dare make me explain to those kids that you broke it." His hand found hers, weak but certain, blood-slicked fingers wrapping around her own. "Not breaking it," he managed, voice thin, "just slower than I planned." It wasn't until the medics had stabilized him enough to move, until he was loaded onto a stretcher with Mira and Juno running across the lawn to grip whatever part of him they could reach, that Nia finally let herself collapse against the burned wall behind her, her whole body shaking with an aftermath that had been waiting all afternoon for permission to arrive. The war was over. The cost had nearly been everything. 3 weeks later, the house had begun, slowly, to look like a home again instead of a battlefield. Construction crews worked on the East Wing in the mornings, the sound of hammers and saws replacing the memory of gunfire one nail at a time. Director Min and the surviving June Syndicate operatives were in custody somewhere Nia didn't ask too many questions about. The Han family's alliance with Seo Jin quietly, permanently dissolved, Yura Han herself having vanished from the city's circles entirely, once her involvement in feeding information became impossible to fully deny. Seo Jin healed slower than his children wanted and faster than the doctors expected, which Nia decided was probably the most accurate summary of the man she'd come to know over the last month. She found him on the back terrace one evening, arms still in a sling, watching the sunset bleed orange and pink across a sky that had, weeks ago, been choked with smoke instead. "You're supposed to be resting," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "I am resting. This is what resting looks like for me." He glanced at her, something soft and unguarded in his face that she'd seen more and more often since the attack, like surviving it had stripped away whatever was left of his need to perform control all the time. "How are the kids?" "Mira's asleep. Juno's pretending to do homework, but mostly he's been sitting outside her door for the last hour. I think he's scared to stop watching her even now. Seojin's jaw tightened. That's my fault. It's not your fault that two kids who already lost their mother got scared they were about to lose everyone else, too. Nia's voice was gentle but firm. It's just what happened. You don't have to carry guilt for every scar this family has. Some of them aren't yours to own. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the colors shift over the tree line. I almost lost you, he said finally. In that hallway. In the garage. A dozen different moments that week. I almost lost you, and I kept thinking, I just got her. I just found her, and I'm about to bury her the same way I buried Hana, and I won't survive doing that twice. You didn't lose me, Nia said quietly. I know, but I felt the shape of it anyway. The almost. He turned to face her fully, his good hand finding hers across the small distance between their chairs. I've spent 2 years building walls around this family so high nothing could get through them, and the first real threat that came along got through anyway, from the inside, because I was so busy guarding the gates I forgot to check who I'd already let inside them. His thumb traced slow, careful circles over her knuckles. And then you happened. A stranger in an alley who had every reason to run from a man like me, and instead you stayed, and you fought for my children like they were your own, and you held me together when I came apart in that study, and I keep asking myself what I did to deserve someone who'd do all of that for a family that isn't even hers. They are mine, Nia said, the words arriving with a certainty that surprised even her. Maybe not by blood, but Mira held my hand through every nightmare this month, and Juno apologized to me last week for what he said that first night, on his own, without anyone telling him to. That's not nothing, Seojin. That's not temporary. Whatever Yurahan called me, barren, nothing, penniless, none of it changes the fact that those kids look for me in a room before they look for anyone else now. Seojin's eyes were wet, something he would have hidden a month ago, something he no longer bothered hiding from her. I spent my whole life thinking I was nobody, Nia continued, quieter now, the words she'd carried since that rainy alley finally finding their full shape. A waitress nobody would miss if she disappeared. A woman whose own mother decided she wasn't worth staying for. A body that failed at the one thing people expect women to be able to do. I built my whole life around being small enough that nothing could hurt me, because if nobody ever really saw me, nobody could ever really leave me. And now? Seojin asked, voice barely above a whisper. Now I have 2 kids who scream for me in the hallway when they're scared, she said, her own voice breaking slightly. And a man who ran back into gunfire instead of running away from the danger I brought into his life. I don't know how to be nobody anymore, Seojin. You ruined that for me. All of you did. He pulled her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles with a tenderness that contradicted every brutal, lethal thing she'd watched those same hands do over the last month. To me, he said, echoing the words from that first rain-soaked night, you are everything. You were everything the second you whispered that nobody was coming, and I decided right then I was going to spend the rest of my life proving you wrong about that, for as long as you'd let me. Nia leaned into him carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder, and let herself simply exist in that quiet evening, the sunset finishing its slow burn into purple dusk, the sound of Juno's footsteps still pacing faithfully outside his sister's door somewhere above them. Spring came slow and then all at once, the way it always does after a long winter, and with it came small, ordinary miracles that meant more to Nia than anything dramatic ever could have. Mira's nightmares grew further apart, then stopped altogether around the time the last of the East Wing's reconstruction finished. Juno started speaking more freely at dinner, occasionally even laughing, a sound Seojin told her quietly he hadn't heard from his son in over 2 years. Nia enrolled in night classes that spring, working toward a social work degree she'd abandoned years earlier when tuition and medical bills had made dreams feel like luxuries she couldn't afford. Seojin paid for none of it directly. She'd been firm about that, some old pride refusing to let herself become a woman who depended entirely on a man's money. But he rearranged his schedule without being asked so someone could always be home with the children on the night she had class. And that quiet, unglamorous support meant more to her than any grand gesture could have. It was during one of those long study nights, surrounded by textbooks on trauma-informed care and childhood attachment, that Nia found the words for what she wanted to do with the degree once she finished it. Children who'd grown up the way she had, convinced of their own unworth by absence, by silence, by a world too busy to notice them, deserved someone who understood that particular ache from the inside, who could look at a kid who'd decided they were nobody and recognize the lie for exactly what it was. Because she'd lived inside that lie herself for 30 years before someone finally stepped out of an alley's darkness and refused to let her keep believing it. She found her cousin Talisa that same spring, a woman she hadn't seen since childhood, before her mother's leaving had scattered what little family she'd had into silence and distance. A simple search, a phone call she'd almost talked herself out of making 3 separate times, and on the other end of the line, a voice cracking with disbelief and joy. "I always wondered what happened to you," Talisa said, crying audibly through the phone. "Your mama told everybody you two moved away together. We thought you were fine. We thought you didn't want to be found." "She left me," Naya said quietly, the old wound finally finding air instead of silence. "When I was 12, I thought nobody came looking because nobody wanted to. I looked," Talisa said. "For years I looked. Your mama just made sure I never found the right address." A pause, thick with grief for time neither of them could get back. "You were never abandoned by everybody, baby. Just by the one person who should have stayed and never told the rest of us the truth." It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. There were years of silence to account for, an estranged family to slowly, carefully rebuild trust with, old wounds that didn't close just because the truth had finally surfaced. But it was real, and it was honest, and it gave Naya something she hadn't had in 2 decades. Proof that nobody is coming had never been entirely true. She'd just been looking in the wrong direction, convinced that silence meant abandonment instead of a lie someone else had constructed to keep her small and easy to forget. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday in early June, unremarkable in their appearance, plain manila folders that gave no hint of the weight they carried. Seojin laid them on the kitchen table that evening, after the children had gone to bed, his expression carrying a nervousness Nia had rarely seen from him. "What is this?" she asked, though something in her chest had already begun to guess. "Guardianship papers," he said, "for Juno and Mira, co-guardian, alongside me." He watched her face carefully, gauging her reaction with the same intensity he'd once used to read threats in a room. "I'm not asking you to replace Hana. Nobody could, and I'd never want you to try. But the kids, they've started introducing you as family without anyone telling them to. Mira told her teacher last month that she has 2 parents who love her. And when the teacher asked who, she didn't say me and Hana, she said me and you." Nia's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder, scanning words that felt too large and too permanent for the kitchen table they were sitting at. "This isn't about replacing anyone," Seojin continued, quieter now. "It's about making official what's already true in this house. You stayed when staying meant walking into a war you didn't start. You held Mira together when I couldn't. You taught Juno that strength doesn't have to look like violence. You earned this, Nia, not through blood, through every single day you chose to stay anyway." She thought, in that moment, of the alley, of rain hammering down on broken concrete, of 3 men closing in on a woman who'd already decided nobody would ever come for her. She thought of the word broken she'd carried like a brand for 30 years, the word Yurahan had thrown at her like a weapon, the word she'd believed about herself longer than she'd believed almost anything else. "Yes," she said, signing her name beneath Seojin's on the page, her handwriting steadier than she expected. "Yes, I'll sign." The essay arrived in Nia's hands on an ordinary Thursday morning in late June, nearly a year to the day since that rain-soaked night in the alley, handed to her by Mira's 2nd-grade teacher at a parent conference Nia attended alongside Seojin, both of them sitting in chairs built for children far smaller than themselves. "Mira wrote something for our family unit," the teacher said, smiling warmly as she passed the paper across the desk. "I thought you'd want to see it before the class shares them at the assembly next week." The title sat at the top of the page in careful looping 7-year-old handwriting, decorated with a small drawn flower in the corner. "My second mom." Nia's breath caught somewhere in her chest before she'd even read the first line. "My second mom's name is Nia. She didn't grow me in her tummy, but she grew my heart back when it was broken. She found me when I was sad, and she stayed even when scary things happened. My first mom is in my memory and my heart. My second mom is in my house and my hugs." I am lucky because I get two moms instead of zero. My brother says that's not how families work, but I think families work however the people in them decide they want to work. My second mom taught me that. She said nobody is ever just one thing, broken or whole, alone or loved. She said you get to choose, every single day, who you let love you. I choose her. I think she chose me too. Nia read it twice, then a third time, her vision blurring with tears she didn't try particularly hard to stop. Across the small classroom table, Seojin reached over and took her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright, and neither of them said anything at all, because there wasn't anything left to say that the page hadn't already said better. That evening, back in the kitchen that had become the unlikely center of a family rebuilt from ruin, Nia stood at the counter rereading Mira's essay for what was probably the 10th time, the paper soft now from handling, while behind her Seojin attempted, with characteristic stubbornness and a complete absence of culinary skill, to make breakfast for dinner because Mira had requested it, and he'd never once told either of his children no when it mattered least and cost him nothing but a little dignity. Smoke began curling from the pan. Seojin, I have it handled. You do not have it handled. Something is on fire. It's caramelized, he said, with the particular stubborn dignity of a powerful man refusing to admit defeat to scrambled eggs. And Nia laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. The kind she hadn't been capable of for most of her life before this house. Before these people. Before a man stepped out of rain-soaked darkness and refused to let her keep believing she was nothing. Juno wandered in, took one look at the smoking pan, and without a word retrieved the fire extinguisher from beneath the sink with the weary competence of a teenager who'd clearly done this before. Mira trailed behind him in fox-printed pajamas, climbing onto a kitchen stool to watch the chaos with delighted, unbothered curiosity, completely unfazed by smoke alarms or burnt eggs or any of it, because in this house, this particular kind of chaos had become simply what love looked like on an ordinary Tuesday. Nia watched them, this strange, hard-won, fiercely assembled family, built not from blood but from choice, from every single person in this kitchen deciding, again and again, on every difficult day, to stay anyway, and felt the last cold edges of that old word finally dissolve completely. She was no longer the woman who'd stood in an alley, soaked and shaking, whispering that nobody was coming. She was no longer nobody. She folded Mira's essay carefully and tucked it into her pocket, close to her heart, where she intended to keep it for the rest of her life, and crossed the kitchen to rescue dinner, to scold a smiling, unrepentant mafia boss for nearly burning down a house that had already survived far worse than scrambled eggs, to laugh with two children who had taught her more about belonging in a single year than the first 30 years of her life ever had. She was home. The screen would fade here, on an ordinary kitchen, smoke curling lazily toward a ceiling that had once been scorched by something far more dangerous than breakfast, on a family that had been forged in fire and chosen, deliberately, every single day since, to keep choosing each other anyway. Proof that the word nobody was never a sentence. It was only ever a chapter, waiting for someone brave enough to turn the page.